Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. They came to Canada for a better life, only to have their hopes for a brighter future brutally cut short.
The surveillance video is very telling of the attacker because he's stealthily stalking the victim.
I know she must have put up a fight.
Male DNA was found under the fingernail of the deceased's right hand.
We received a radio call that there was possible human remains found in a bag in the ravine. My fear is this was just going to be an unknown Jane Doe.
My concern was, is there evidence inside? Is he destroying it? Or what else is he doing?
The other toothbrush that was tested actually generated a male DNA profile.
Oh my God, I was rubbing shoulders, sitting side by side, going through ABCs with a murderer.
Here now is I Heard Her Screams.
On the 23rd of October 2012, Ms. Semret is first seen by the camera that's above the underground parking garage in this particular location at 85 Bleecker Street. She's walking from the Delta Chelsea Hotel. She's finished her night shift. It's pouring rain.
When she left the hotel that morning, the group, they wanted to walk together, and she's like, oh, I'm fine. Then they decided to go to the, I think, coffee shop or something, and she just went on her way.
My observations of the video appear that Ms. Semret is completely oblivious to any imminent danger. I never see her turn around. She doesn't seem to have any security or safety concerns. At this location on the south side of 85 Bleecker Street, it's the main camera. It photographs and videotapes both Ms. Semret, and behind her, only feet behind her, is the offender. The offender has his hand inside his right pocket and he's holding a knife. And you can see on the videotape that the hand is moving, and I believe at this time he's trying to get a good grip on the knife.
The surveillance video is very telling of the attacker because he's stealthily stalking the victim, and he is very artfully dodging her by being just enough behind her that she won't notice that someone's following her from one laneway to another.
The offender is accelerating his pace, and he's closing the distance between himself and Ms. Semret.
The scream just woke me up in the morning, and it sounded like it was an attack.
My bedroom is right across, and I heard her screams.
I heard a woman screaming. I seen this man repeatedly stab this lady about 15, 16 times. There's a lot of blood.
Paul Down was collecting beer bottles at a nearby park and knew someone was in trouble. As he approached to try and stop the attack, he says another Good Samaritan holding an umbrella tried to intervene.
David Hughes was a Good Samaritan walking through the Cabbagetown neighborhood that morning when he heard the blood-curdling scream of a woman being attacked.
He sees the offender standing over Ms. Semret. He's armed with a long-bladed kitchen-style knife. She was screaming and fighting for her life.
He come flying out of nowhere with an umbrella. He whacked the knife out of the guy's hand. The guy dropped the knife.
He picked up the knife and brandished it at Mr. Hughes and then fled the scene back through the laneway and then out of sight into the darkness.
I heard her screaming, and I saw him run down the alley here.
Paul Down gave chase, but the suspect, who he says was wearing a hoodie and a scarf on his face, got away.
Mr. Hughes indicated to the investigators that he could not identify the attacker.
So David Hughes never really got a clear look at the assailant's face, but he is able to get a glimpse of the killer for a brief fleeting moment, although his view of him is distorted by the glaring light, the driving rain, and the fact he's fighting for his life as well with an umbrella against a knife-wielding attacker. Informs police that he thought the man was a white man between 5'10" and 6'2" tall, and that he had walked with a limp as he fled from the murder scene. Plus, the man had a baseball cap tucked over his face. The murder weapon was never found. Police checked all of the garbage around that site.
Ms. Semret never spoke anything other than the fact that she was stabbed numerous times. Many of the injuries were individually fatal on their own, and she was transported to hospital, but unfortunately very quickly succumbed to her injuries once she arrived at hospital. Ms. Nighisti Semret was an immigrant from Eritrea. She was 55 years old at the time of her death.
Police say the motive here is unclear. Was it robbery? Was it sexual assault? Or was it domestic? Did, in fact, the attacker know his victim? That is not clear. What is clear is that there is a suspect on the loose. Police had the canine unit out here this morning searching, and obviously they are very concerned because if this was an unprovoked attack, they want to make sure that this man does not strike again.
Her actual attack is not recorded on camera, and the attack scene is in this particular area. Ms. Semret is only about several hundred feet from home.
Which is an extremely short walk, probably 20-minute stroll from that hotel downtown to her Cabbagetown neighborhood. We have video from the last laneway walk, but before that, we don't really know when the stalker started following her. It really begged the question, why would anyone want to murder Nighisti Semret?
She told me she came from Eritrea, and she came to make a refugee claim because her life was in danger and she had to escape. And I was going to be helping her to look for permanent housing. She was very outgoing, very, very kind-hearted, very energetic, very focused, and knows what she wanted. When I saw the news about Nighisti's death on the TV, I was very shocked. I was confused. I wouldn't immediately know or suspect who did it.
She was hardworking, caused no trouble for anyone, apparently had no enemies. That's what made this murder so mysterious and so baffling for the community.
Coming up on Crime Beat, as police search for clues as to who was responsible for Nighisti Semret's murder, there's another grisly discovery. That's coming up after the break. "55-year-old Nighisti Semret, a refugee who came to Canada from Eritrea, has been stabbed to death walking home from her night shift in downtown Toronto. Witnesses weren't able to identify her attacker. But it turns out Semret herself left investigators a clue. Now back to I heard her screams.
Nighisti came to apply. I believe a friend brought her from her church, and she came to apply for regular janitorial duty. And overnight, we placed her at the Chelsea Hotel. Everyone in her crew calls her Nikki. 100% committed to her crew. How can I describe her? Go-getter, fierce personality. And she had a beautiful smile. She had a beautiful smile. Tough lady, but a beautiful smile.
With heavy hearts, the congregation sang as the casket carrying Nighisti Semret entered St. Michael's Eritrean Orthodox Church. A special ceremony to bless her body before she's buried back home.
She's one of us. That's why we have to be together.
It's very crippling because our community is very tight, and we're all really affected by what's happened.
Today, hundreds of mourners packed into this Jane and St. Clair area church, including Semret's relatives from the U.S. Her husband and kids are still in Africa.
It's very hard, it's very sad for her husband and for her children. So we are very sorry.
It's just sometimes I'm lost for words because I can see her and I can hear her, and I know that in her heart, she's a fighter. And I know she must have put up a fight. We all know that.
The fact that Ms. Semret fought for her own life was the single biggest investigative break that we had as homicide investigators. And as a result of that, she caused the offender to wound himself and she collected the offender's DNA. It's extremely, extremely rare in a stabbing homicide. Male DNA was found under the fingernail of the deceased's right hand. Male DNA was found on the canvas portion of the umbrella used by the citizen who confronted the offender. Male DNA was detected on the black khaki canvas bag the deceased was carrying.
Detective Sergeant Gary Giroux believes this is the blood of Semret's killer, though he says there are no matches in the national database. He believes the suspect accidentally might have sliced himself during the attack, so they're looking for someone who might have been nursing an injury around that time.
Nikki Nighisti Semret was fatally stabbed October 23, 2012, and by May 6th, Detective Sergeant Gary Giroux enlisted the public's assistance.
So I was asking members of the public to think back to around Halloween, around the time of the attack on Ms. Semret, of individuals within the community that might have a wound on their hands or arms that was unexplained. And at the same time, we released a $50,000 reward for information leading to Ms. Semret's offender's apprehension.
Toronto police investigators remain here deep in the woods near 120 Alliance Avenue. This is the Weston Road and Black Creek area. It was last Friday afternoon, just behind this tree line along the banks of Black Creek, that the body of a woman was found.
So 18 days after the presser where Detective Sergeant Gary Giroux said they were looking for a suspect who may have injured himself in late October 2012, 18 days after that press conference, police make a horrifying discovery.
First day of evening shift, we received a radio call that there was possible human remains found in a bag in the ravine, and it was found by a dog walker who noticed the bag on the path he was on, and it smelt, and he opened it up.
And unzipped it a little, seen white maggots wrapped in black plastic. That death smell hit me in the face, and that was enough for me.
And thank goodness he was curious enough to take a look. And just to be dumped like a piece of garbage, it's unfathomable. It's just not right. Right now, this is a different time of year, but back then, this was high grass, and it was about 9 meters of 3-foot high grass, and you had to walk through just this part in the grass to get to where we are here. And the tracker bag would have been found in this general location.
We could see we only had a torso. We had clothing on it, but we had no head, we had no arms, we had nothing that you'd get the regular identification from. You usually go from facial recognition, fingerprints, dental. We had nothing. So it was horrifying. My fear is this was just going to be an unknown Jane Doe. The tracker bag was taken to the morgue, and when we went through the bags, there was various garbage bags and a bed sheet with stripes on it. Then we started working on the outside pockets. That was the inside where the torso was. And they were all empty till we got to the last pocket on one side. And I opened it up. There seemed to be just this white little piece of something. And I picked it up, and it was a receipt with the name on it. And it was Rigat Ghirmay. And that was exciting. It gave us somewhere to start, and I immediately contacted Homicide with that information.
That wasn't a first and last name, it was a first and middle name. So I ran it, then it came up as Rigat Ghirmay, Ghirmay being the surname.
And within an hour, I got a call back. We believe we've identified the owner of that receipt. as Rigat Ghirmay.
So they have a name of a woman, they have the body, but they haven't identified that that body is the woman who's named on that receipt. They don't know if someone else was killed and they just used that bag and it's her bag with that receipt.
In our occurrence tracking system, there was an occurrence a few months prior where a Rigat Ghirmay had been involved in an incident where she was the victim of an assault with a weapon. Another female she was residing with. Just by chance, she had brought a male with her. And Rigat said, well, this is the person I'm going to be living with in the interim while I find new housing. And the officer said, well, you know, sir, what's your name? And he obtained his name, his date of birth, and his address. And that was sort of the moment the light bulb went off that this is our person of interest.
The police officer took down the name of her escort, and the name was Adonai Zacharias.
Coming up.
Mr. Zacharias, is the police, can you come to the door, please?
Police pay this man a visit to inquire about Rigat Ghirmay's whereabouts. Seven months after Nighisti Semret's murder, dismembered human remains have been found in a Toronto park, stuffed into a duffel bag. Investigators believe the female victim may be Rigat Ghirmay. Police have a person of interest, a man she used to live with named Adonai Zacharias. We return now to I Heard Her Screams.
Rigat Ghirmay was a beautiful 28-year-old woman from Eritrea, came to Canada in her late teens, who came here as a refugee about 15 years earlier. She was learning English. She was advancing in her ESL courses to the next level. And she really wanted to get started, just as Nighisti Semret did, working in Canada and building a life here.
She arrived in the class and she told me that she had just completed a PSW course at a local college, but that she needed to upgrade her language skills. She seemed like a lovely person. She was gentle. She was friendly with other students, but she didn't reveal a lot of her personal life to me. I was the ESL teacher for Rigat Ghirmay and Adonai Zacharias. Adonai seemed to be on the quiet side. However, he seemed like a nice enough person upon first meeting him. They would always sit together. Rigat seemed to help Adonai quite a bit with his work in the classroom. I also knew that they were living together.
They described each other as being as close as brother and sister, but most people suspected they were in a romantic relationship.
You know, I was curious about the nature of the relationship, but I was never suspicious. I never observed anything that would indicate that they were not getting along. However, there was one morning where I met them outside the school, and as I approached them, there was just a very dark, glum expression on his face. She mentioned that she was going to be getting an apartment through public housing, and soon after that, she did move out.
So Rigat Ghirmay, people noticed that when she left Adonai Zacharias' apartment in late April and moved in on her own, she appeared more exuberant and in a better frame of mind. She seemed very enthusiastic and happy about life.
I noticed a change in him, disheveled looking. He was very tired and very disengaged at that time.
That individual lived at 101 Humber Boulevard, very close to where this tracker bag was found.
And from here you can see the apartment buildings on Humber Boulevard.
The last time she's seen alive, she was walking into her apartment at 285 Shooter.
Rigat Ghirmay was last seen alive as she accompanied Adne Zacharias in her apartment building going up the elevator towards that on May 15th, 2013.
And he has subsequently seen on video coming out with different bags, but she's never seen coming out again.
So they go to the apartment where she once lived up until a few weeks ago to see if her roommate could shed some light on her whereabouts.
So went over there and went up to the 8th floor and was knocking, advising it was the police.
Mr. Zacharias, it's the police. Can you come to the door, please? Mr. Zacharias, can you come to the door? We can see you looking through the peephole.
Now I have this person basically trying to avoid us inside the apartment. I have the witness saying, well, I haven't seen that woman in a little while. So at this point, Mr. Zacharias went from a person of interest to a suspect.
Neighbors seen him inside?
Yeah. My concern was, is there evidence inside? Is he destroying it? Or what else is he doing?
Mr. Zacharias, we know you're in there. Please come to the door.
So I said, you know, the junior officer, open up the mail slot and have a look inside. The apartment itself is a bachelor apartment. And there's sort of a half wall between the common living area and where the bed was. So you could only see the bottom part of the bed. We could see legs sort of flutter kicking at the bottom of the bed. And I said, well, he's in there. He's obviously, it almost felt like he was like almost putting the sheets over his head like a child saying, you know, I hope these people just go away. So I made a decision at that time that we were going to make entry. There's a section of the criminal code that allows us to make entry without a warrant if we have the grounds for a warrant. And ultimately, Mr. Zacharias was placed under arrest in the apartment. There was no admissions by Mr. Zacharias in regards to any wrongdoing towards Rigat. According to him, he's just as baffled as us as to where she was.
Police would like anyone who may have witnessed her suspect moving this green duffel bag around May 15th to the 24th to contact them.
So surveillance videos from 285 Shooter captured Zacharias dragging these suspicious bags through that lobby, and then later dragging the same bags through the lobby and through the hallway in his apartment.
At one point, he came out of the elevators. He didn't have a suitcase, but he had a rag, and he bent down and cleaned up the elevator floor.
And then he came back into the hallway with a cloth to wipe up what was later determined to be blood from Rigat Ghirmay that was deposited on the floor as he dragged that bag through the hallway.
Moving back from that, we had a secondary crime scene developing on the eastern part of Toronto as well, over on Shooter Street.
We believe that is the scene where she was murdered and dismembered. There were small areas of blood throughout the apartment, but the bathtub, there were cut marks in the tub. There were long scratch marks near the drain area. There was visible drops throughout the apartment, on the table near her bed, marks on the walls, marks before you got into the bathroom. On the cold water tap, there was visible blood on a mop that was right beside the sink, visible blood in the tub itself. There were two toothbrushes at her sink, and both were collected for a DNA comparison to the torso. Lucky for us, the toothbrushes produced 2 DNA profiles, one for a male and one for a female. It was confirmed that Rigat Ghirmay was the source of the female DNA profile, and the male DNA profile we suspected was Adnai Zakaris.
They had an overwhelming amount of evidence that he was involved in the dismemberment of her body. The police had the evidence of the torso. They had DNA blood on his trousers. His DNA was on that tracker bag. They had the surveillance video. They had the J-cloth that he used to mop up the blood that oozed out of the bags in the hallway of his apartment. So he never threw that out. Police never located any murder weapon for Rigat Ghirmay, but they believe that the killer used the knives from her own block to dismember her body as they were missing from her apartment.
He had in his resume that he had worked as a meat packer, and he was able to cut meat in small pieces and prepare for packaging and transportation. And it was just eerie.
The cause of death has yet to be determined, and only a third of the woman's remains have so far been found. In a strange coincidence, Ghirmay lived in the same Cabbagetown neighborhood where 55-year-old Nighisti Semret was stabbed to death on October 23, 2012.
We're here in the Cabbagetown alley where the hotel worker was killed. This afternoon, police revealed shocking and disturbing details of a connection to another murder.
Those disturbing details revealed after the break. The murder of 55-year-old Nighisti Semret remained unsolved for months. An Eritrean refugee killed as she walked home from work. But when human remains are discovered belonging to another Eritrean woman, 28-year-old Rigat Ghirmay, police make an astonishing breakthrough in the case. Now, back to I heard her screams.
In 2013, I was involved with the Rigat Ghirmay homicide case. We received a piece of muscle tissue that was submitted from the remains that were found within the tracker bag in the ravine. We also received 2 toothbrushes that we also analyzed. Upon examination and analysis of the toothbrushes, a female DNA profile was obtained from one toothbrush, which matched the DNA profile from the human remains, thereby providing scientific support for those remains actually being those of Rigat Ghirmay. The other toothbrush that was tested actually generated a male DNA profile, which to me seemed kind of inconsequential at the time. I had reached out to investigators to ask whether that male DNA profile should be uploaded to the crime scene index of the DNA databank. And once it was uploaded, one of my colleagues actually walked into my room and said to me, "I think it's actually hit to one of your other cases that you're currently working on." And my heart started racing in that moment.
On the 28th of June of 2013, I received a phone call from Ms. Kelly Bowie from the biology department at the Center of Forensic Sciences. She indicated to me that the male DNA profile found on the brush of the toothbrush at 285 Shooter Street, the male DNA is exactly the same DNA as that was found underneath the fingernails of Ms. Semret, the same DNA on the umbrella, shield, and on the black khaki bag, and that blood was associated to an offender who is in custody, and his name was Adnai Zakaris.
And in that moment that I was speaking with Detective Giroux, and he could hear that emotion in my voice, I could also sense that he was incredulous at those results. Obtaining this type of investigative information by way of DNA testing and how pivotal the results were in this case is certainly not a common occurrence.
And as soon as I get off the phone conversation with Ms. Bowie, I called one of the investigators and I asked him if he was present when Mr. Zakaris was photographed at the time of his arrest. And I said, "Does he have scars or fresh wounds on his hands or arms?" and he indicated to me he's wounded on both his hands and arms, and the wounds had both been photographed. He's right-handed. His right hand traveled down the blade of the knife, and he cut all of the tendons on the inside of his right hand. In addition to that, he had a controlling hand injury on his left arm, which means he's trying to hold Miss Semret with his left arm while he's trying to stab her, and in doing so, he stabbed himself. Within hours of Miss Semret's murder, Mr. Zacharias returned to his home at 101 Humber Boulevard, and he's bleeding substantially.
And he phones 911, and Rigat Ghirmay, who's better in English, tries to help him.
Emergency, do you need police, fire department, or ambulance?
Hi, could you help me please? I have some problem in my hand.
You have a problem with your hand? Do you need an ambulance?
Yeah, I need ambulance.
Okay, I'll put you through. Stay on the line.
And while en route to the Toronto General Hospital, and he indicated to him that during an accident within the building, he got both of his hands caught in a door that had slammed closed as a result of the wind. As soon as the paramedic heard this explanation, they indicated that his injuries were not consistent with that type of conduct. So they tried to get Ms. Ghirmay to tell them the truth with regards to how he sustained his injuries, and at that point, Ms. Ghirmay refused to make any eye contact with them and just looked at the floor of the ambulance. It would appear that as a result of the questions from the paramedic, Ms. Ghirmay realized that Mr. Zacharias was lying about how he received his injuries.
She didn't find out till 3 or 4 days later when a friend of hers told her, "Did you hear about Nighisti Semret's murder? A fellow Eritrean stabbed downtown." So she might not have put that together right away that day, but later on, when after the May 6th press conference, when they're looking for someone who suffered these injuries in late October, this might have alerted Rigat Ghirmay to the fact that she may have accompanied the killer to the hospital within an hour and a half of Nighisti Semret's death.
Rigat did know or had figured out what Mr. Zacharias had done, and had either confronted him or had let him know that she in fact knew that he was the murderer of Nighisti.
At the time, police charged Zacharias with indignity to a body, but they couldn't file a homicide charge until now. 2 women, both immigrated here from Eritrea in search of a better life. Both would end up murdered, and police allege this man, also an Eritrean immigrant, is their killer.
On September the 30th of 2013, myself and Detective Sergeant Gray on our individual cases arrested Mr. Zacharias for 2 counts of first-degree murder. Detective Sergeant Gray and myself then interrogated him with regards to those 2 particular cases.
Just have a seat right here.
Thank you so much. She did nothing but help you, support you, love you, and you killed her for nothing. How did you do that?
Adnai Zacharias said very little.
Yeah, there's nothing I can say. I heard you, whatever you say, and then tomorrow I'll speak to my lawyer and respond to you.
And can you ask him if he knew Nighisti?
Nighisti, تفضل ميركا.
أنا كلمي بزبلة حجة خزارة بقول له نجار يبلين مالت مس تبعي تزرعي بيه.
Yeah, I can't say anything now before I speak with my lawyer.
The frustration in investigating Mr. Zacharias in relation to Ms. Semret's murder is that we never did find out what the motive was.
But it turns out Adnai Zacharias and Nighisti Semret knew each other.
She was also a refugee claimant that came to Sojourn House. Semret came to my office with Adnai to interpret for him. He also mentioned to me that they are friends and they are from the same country.
So Adnai Zacharias and Nighisti Semret came from the same village in Eritrea. Their families knew each other. They were on good terms. They both came to Canada and lived at the same refugee house, the Sojourn House, where they were acclimated to Canada.
They do sit together in the dining, they eat together, and they go out together looking for accommodation as I give leads.
They found Nighisti Semret's Eritrean name in Adnai Zacharias' phone book and her current phone number. And he denied knowing her or having reached out to her, but there were phone records that put them both in contact with each other. There were several phone calls between Nighisti Semret and Adnai Zacharias in the months leading up to her murder, but it's unknown why there would be any animosity between them.
How and why will Adonai kill Semret? Semret was helping him. Semret was helping so many other people.
We never found any information that Miss Semret knew Miss Ghirmay, so the women had no association with each other. Miss Semret's family has no idea why she was murdered.
Coming up, investigators learn more about their suspect, and they question, is Adonai Zacharias even who he says he is? Despite maintaining his innocence, Adonai Zacharias is now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the stabbing death of fellow Eritrean refugee Nighisti Semret and in the murder and dismemberment of his former roommate Rigat Ghirmay, also from Eritrea. We return now to the conclusion of I Heard Her Screams.
The only thing I'm going to ask you is that for her family, you tell me where the rest of Rigat is.
Mr. Zacharias was not cooperating in regards to locating the rest of Rigat's body. So I was able to make contact with a person who spoke the language from Eritrea, I believe it was Tigrinya. This person agreed to assist us and befriended Mr. Zacharias in the jail system where he's being detained. So Mr. Zacharias, instead of saying he was in for break and enter or even for the indignity to a dead body, he advised our informant that he had driven a pickaxe through his boss's eye because his boss was late in paying him and he was mad at him. And so at this point, we had suspicions that Mr. Zacharias had been involved in a murder prior to this, and we had tracked his activities after the first murder, prior to Rigat's murder. And he had fled to Germany.
A laptop computer was recovered, and it would appear from the searches that he was tracking the investigation into Miss Semret's murder.
He accessed the internet 22 times to see what was going on with the investigation into the murder of Nighisti Semret.
I believe that Mr. Zacharias returned to Canada after staying for that period of time in Germany because he felt comfortable that the investigation was progressing in a direction that did not identify him.
All our investigations, the guy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He was destitute.
The investigation never revealed any other criminal conduct in any other parts of the world. He wasn't wanted by any other countries that we were aware of as a result of some Interpol inquiries that I had conducted. But it would appear that Adnai Zacharias is not this individual's name, that he has identification in other names, and internationally, I'm not to this day absolutely certain as to what his identification is.
A human skull and other human remains have been discovered along this park path near Weston Road and St. Clair Avenue West.
Rigat Ghirmay was last seen alive May 15, 2013. It wasn't until April 2016 that the final pieces of her skeletal remains were found. But because of the lengthy decomposition of the body, it still doesn't reveal the cause of death.
2 years after his incarceration, Mr. Zacharias went on trial first for the murder of Nighisti Semret.
Adnai Zacharias pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder of Nighisti Semret. His defense was that the Crown had to prove that he was the stabber. The only evidence they really had in their favor was the misidentification evidence of David Hughes.
That is something that the defense counsel asked me about at Mr. Zacharias' first trial in relation to Miss Semret, that I had told the media and the community that he was white, when in fact he's a black man. In the bottom right-hand corner of the recording, which is the camera from the south side of 85 Bleecker Street, there's a light over the door and there's a camera beside the light. It washes you out a little bit or makes your skin appear to be lighter than it actually is.
So the jury got past that mistaken detail and pinpointed Adne Zacharias as the killer. The jury found that because of the, well, a triad of factors. His DNA underneath the victim's fingernail, on the umbrella of David Hughes, on the bag, the stalking video of him following her in the laneway before he stabs her, his going to the hospital 90 minutes later for grievous stab wounds.
He was convicted by that jury of first-degree murder. He received an automatic life in prison sentence with a parole eligibility of 25 years.
I was there. We were there. And he didn't look like he had any remorse at all whatsoever. So that part of me was happy that this person got caught. But it doesn't bring her back. So that's what people don't know. It's the pain they leave behind, right?
The trial involving Mr. Zacharias in relation to the murder of Rigat Ghirmay happened 3 years later.
So at the second trial, again, Adne Zacharias pleaded not guilty. The defense was that while he may have dismembered her body to hide a crime, that crime could have been manslaughter. In other words, it could have been some heated argument between them, that he unintentionally caused her death and then panicked and cut up her body parts to get away with that crime, manslaughter, an unintentional murder as opposed to intentional murder. You have strong motive evidence, you have the evidence of dismemberment and concealment, but that may not be able to prove first-degree murder, but it could be a second-degree murder.
And Justice Brown convicted Mr. Zacharias of second-degree murder. He gave him an automatic life in prison sentence with a parole eligibility of 20 years and ran the sentences consecutively to each other, so he received the global 45 years.
Rigat Ghirmay's brother was unable to attend the sentencing hearing, but his victim impact statement was read in by the Crown Attorney. He wrote, "With the heaviest of heart, words cannot express my inconsolable grief that follows me like a shadow since my beloved sister Rigat was taken from us. She always tried to help everyone, especially Mr. Zacharias."
It made me cry. It made me emotional. And I'm just glad that that individual will not be able to come up for parole till he's 84. For someone who was just shown compassion by these two women and helped by these two women, to be murdered and butchered, it's a horror story.
My God, I was dealing with a murderer. I was rubbing shoulders, sitting side by side, going through ABCs with a murderer.
Women continue to be a victim of this kind of gender-based violence. And it's especially disheartening that refugee claimants, women that are most vulnerable of our population here, are the victim of this.
I think we can do more to help newcomer women feel that they belong, feel supported. I just wish I could have seen the signs or done something to help her. Whatever struggles she had back home or hardships, or she came to Canada knowing and willingly thinking that her life would be better. When she worked on her own or when she was on the pool deck area, Nikki would always whistle. The sound travels. So everyone would hear her and everybody would know, oh, that's Nikki at the pool deck. Just hope she's resting in peace, watching us at Chelsea, whistling away.
Adne Zacharias appealed the Semret murder conviction based on a criticism of the judge's instructions. But that appeal was dismissed and the conviction upheld in 2018. He's now appealing the Ghirmay murder conviction. That appeal will be heard in spring 2022. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, check out our YouTube page or download the Global Go app to watch on your phone.